ground rules. As you know, there are a lot of people here today, and a lot of people would like the opportunity to speak. First of all, if you clap your hands or go yay or boo anybody, I will be asking our Sergeant of Arms to remove you from the hall. That kind of behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Secondly, if you have written testimony, I'm asking you, please do not read your testimony. Paraphrase it. We are not accepting this bill today, and the committee will have plenty of time to read any testimony that you have submitted to the committee. Thirdly, when you get up to speak, we're going to be asking you to give us new things. Please do not repeat testimony that has already been given. There are a lot of people here today that would like to speak, and I want to make sure that every person who has signed up to speak has the opportunity to do so. So we're going to go ahead and start, and I'm going to call forward the prime sponsor of the bill, Representative Cushing.
I have to tell you, I didn't really know how to respond at that moment because this is a guy who, he'd known me my whole life, and I realized that his sentiment was he was trying to give me kind of a balm for my pain wishing that there would be an execution. And as I thought about it, this is a guy who'd known me my whole life. And before my father was murdered, I opposed the death penalty, and he was aware of that. But I realized as he's offering me as a source of comfort this wish for an execution, that he presumed that because my father had been murdered, that I would have changed my position on capital punishment. And as I thought about that, I realized that if that took place, if I changed my position on capital punishment because my father was murdered, well, that would only give over more power to the murderer. That would only give over more power to the act of murder. Because not only would my father be taken from me, but so too would my values. And I think it's the same for individuals as it is for society. If we let people who kill turn us into killers, then evil triumphs and the world's worse off. And as I wrestle with it, I come to conclude, like many other victims' family members, that much as we might like to change the past, we can't do it. But what we can do is we can make decisions about the future. And the future that I want, the future that other victim survivors want, is not one where the state engages public employees to conduct a ritual killing of people who brought us to pain. That's not to say that, I want to be really clear. I'm serious about wanting to hold killers accountable for what they do. What House Bill 1170 does is continue the existing policy where those who kill will be punished. Those who are guilty of convicted first-degree murder will be punished by spending the rest of their lives behind prison. I have a memo that was prepared for me from Legislative Services that takes a look at the sentences of life without parole in the state of New Hampshire. And it's been a policy that no one who's ever been convicted of life without parole has ever been released from prison. And I know that because it applies to my father's killers. The issue, the bill that's before you, before the committee, is prospective. It will apply to crimes that are committed after the date of its effectiveness. I say that knowing that there is one case that's currently in the pipeline, so to speak, involving someone who was convicted of first degree of capital murder. I know that New Hampshire right now is in a situation much like following there have been 6 states in the past 6 years that have repealed the death penalty, and in all those instances, the repeal has been prospective. They have left it to the executive branch of the courts to deal with anyone who is on death row, and in a couple of instances, those sentences have been commuted to life without parole, and in a couple of instances, it's still winding its way through the courts. I know that there are a lot of people who are going to speak here today that are going to provide you with a lot of good information. I just want to urge the committee to listen carefully and to realize that we're now at a point where for 140 years, people have sat in this very chamber ever since 1834, when Governor Badger first asked the legislature to repeal capital punishment. And in this chamber, there have been historical debates in that time. This is a place where people debated whether or not we should have chattel slavery in the state. This is a place where people have debated whether or not women should be granted the right to vote. This is a place where rights of all kinds of people, where the values that shape the state have been talked about and have been defined. And what I would hope you would do today, what I would hope would grow out of today, is that there would be, New Hampshire would come to the final conclusion that it can live without the death penalty, that it would respond to this historic call to have a state that's grounded in culture and respect for human rights, and that the committee And the Senate will vote to pass House Bill 1170, and the governor will sign it. And I think when we do that, we'll honor ourselves, and we'll honor life, and we do so in the name of a state that we can all live in. And I just leave you, thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Senator Martin Clark.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Senator Martha Fuller Clark. I represent District 21, which includes the city of Portsmouth and the 7 surrounding communities of Lee, Madbury, Newington, Newfields, Newmarket, and Durham. And I'm here today to address this incredibly significant piece of legislation that is before us, that is to repeal the death penalty through House Bill 1170. My testimony is basically to set the stage of what has been happening around the world and throughout our country since we last considered a repeal in the 1990s. I believe no matter how it is carried out, the death penalty is deeply flawed, biased, expensive, cruel, and tainted by human error. New Hampshire, with the passage of 1170, has the opportunity to join 19 other states in the United States who have already, 18 other states who have already repealed the death penalty. We would become the 19th. And we would join a global movement to abolish a barbaric response to heinous crimes. 2/3 of the countries in the world have already abolished the death penalty, either in law or by practice. All of Europe, with the exception of Belarus, has ended the death penalty. And in South Africa, the apartheid government in 1990 declared a moratorium on the death penalty when it released Nelson Mandela. This process reached fruition in 1995 when capital punishment was abolished altogether in the new South Africa. And not long after, you will remember, Desmond Tutu came to New Hampshire. He came to New Hampshire to plead with our then governor to sign legislation that had been passed by both the House and the Senate abolishing the death penalty. Today we have an opportunity once again to send repeal legislation to our governor, and this time we know she will sign it. In the Americas and in Europe last year, the United States was the only country to carry out executions. And this means that by not only retaining the death penalty, but by actively using it, we are not in good company. By those actions last year, we joined Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and China as the top executioners in the world. Throughout our own country, 18 states, as I've said, have already put an end to the death penalty, and they include Alaska, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. Even in states where the practice of death penalty sentences have been declining significantly over the last decade, and according to a recent Gallup poll, public support for capital punishment has reached its lowest level in 40 years. Like so many here today, and those in so many other states, I am deeply concerned about the horrible crimes that occur within our communities. I want to see our neighborhoods protected, and I want those who commit a violent crime to be held accountable and brought to justice. But I know, however, that the death penalty does not deter violent crime, nor does it make our communities any safer. And nor, as you heard from Representative Cushing, does it bring peace of mind to those victims who have lost loved members through murder. A 2009 survey of criminologists revealed that over 88% believe that the death penalty is not the deterrent to murder. And the murder rate, interestingly enough, in non-death penalty states has remained consistently lower than the rate in states with the death penalty. Common sense indicates that the threat of execution at some future date is unlikely to enter the minds of those acting under the influence of drugs and or alcohol, those who are in the grip of fear or rage, those who are panicking when committing another crime such as a robbery, and those who suffer from mental illness or are mentally disabled to such an extent that they do not fully understand the gravity of their crimes, which may very well be the case in what we saw happen last night in Texas. The death penalty also costs taxpayers millions of dollars. The greatest costs associated with the death penalty occur prior and during the trial, not in post-conviction proceedings. Even if all post-conviction appeals were abolished, the death penalty would still be more expensive than alternate sentences. The death penalty costs taxpayers millions of dollars. And opposing a life sentence in New Hampshire, currently there is only one conviction that is pending and has been handed down since 1939. And it will not be reversed by passage of House Bill 1170, but could cost the state as much as $8 to $10 million, if not more. Having the death penalty as well diverts resources away from genuine crime control measures, mental health treatment, education and rehabilitation programs, meaningful victim services, and drug treatment programs. It also takes away resources needed for emergency services or to create jobs and to promote public health. The death penalty does not resolve any of the real problems associated with crime, and instead serves to brutalize our society. So I'm here today, and I have testimony that goes on to talk about the misapplication of the death penalty in the past, both for those who, a case that one has been executed in Texas, who is believed now to be innocent, another individual who was released the very day that the House voted for this bill because he was exonerated by new evidence that was brought forth in 2014. So we're saying here that, could that happen here? Those things wouldn't happen here. Do we want to take that risk? I don't think so. We are not infallible. Ending the death penalty here ensures that we will never make either of those mistakes that I referred to, meaning that we put someone on death row who is now determined to be innocent. And I think somewhere around 118 individuals have been released from death row recently because they were found to be innocent when subsequent information was brought forward, whether it was DNA or a reversal of testimony by others, or do we want to be responsible for putting someone to death and then find that they didn't commit the crime? I am proud to stand here today with others, determined to put an end to a practice, as I said, that is cruel, flawed, and tainted by human error. Together, if those of us who are elected to lead this great state are courageous enough to put an end to the death penalty once and for all, we will have chosen to stand on the right side of history at last. This is our moment to not only change New Hampshire, but for New Hampshire to help change the nation and the world by repealing the death penalty in our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator. The chair will call Senator David Waters.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Senator David Waters, District 4. Communities of varying Ann Summersworth. I stand before you to support repeal as a matter of my deepest personal faith and conscience. I always think it's best to let the people speak, and so I wanted to today report very briefly on the vigils of people of faith that were held throughout the state and culminated in my home community of Dover on Saturday. And it was an honor to be there among the people of faith in my community who were strongly supporting repeal. I have to deliver to the committee hundreds of petitions which were signed there and elsewhere throughout the state by people of faith. I also want to speak on behalf of another community of conscience. As a life member of the NAACP, I was proud to stand with Carmen Buford Page of the Seacoast NAACP, who delivered a powerful statement about the long-standing commitment of the NAACP against the death penalty. So rather than continue in my own voice, I'd like to present to you the voices of the petitioners across the state and the community of faith who write, "We, the undersigned members of faith community, reflecting the rich diversity of faith traditions and spiritual practices observed in New Hampshire, stand together to express our desire to repeal of New Hampshire's death penalty statute." Thank you, and I'll bring the petition.
Thank you very much, Senator. The chair will call Senator Cataldo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, State Senator Sam Cataldo, representing Senate District 6. I have a handout for you, by the way. It's called The Parade, and I'm going to read some excerpts out of that. And then lastly, the New Hampshire Constitution. For the record, a matter of life and death. At around 1:45 a.m., my partner, Arthur Michael Bridge, and I received a report of gunshots fired in a second-floor apartment on Lake Street. After investigating the apartment, we decided to check a lead before returning to the station. We rode our bikes east on Lake Avenue and then north on Lincoln Street to Litchfield Lane. Neither of us considering when we entered the alley that we would mean the end of Michael's life and an irrevocable change to my own life. The details of what happened next are all part of the official court records and are the sort of thing we have all soon to often seen on TV. Only this time, no happy ending. Briggs was shot at close range. I watched him fall, drew my weapon, and shot 4 rounds at the fleeing man, whom I and the rest of New Hampshire would come to know as Michael Addison, who today resides in a Concord State Prison.
Senator Cataldo, can I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
ask you to hold on for a second? Representative Morgan, could you please stop talking? We can hear you up here, and it's very disruptive. Thank you. Please continue, Senator
Thank you.
Cataldo.
And within this context of the parade that I've handed out to you, and it states by the following: I am a Catholic, and today these 3 words mean more to me than I ever thought they would in my life, including the loss of several friends who cannot understand how a guy who has seen what I have seen throughout my life and speaking publicly in favor of the death penalty to testify against it. It has not been too easy a journey. And ultimately, I didn't make the change. I just decided until I hit a humble enough spot in my life where I could do and ask God for forgiveness. He gave it unconditionally. As a receiver of that gift, who am I to rob it from someone else, even my worst enemy? And I'll finish up, Madam Chair, with 2 things. Last year, my wife and I attended a ceremony in Manchester to renew our vows. On that particular day, there was over 200 people. And we had 25 years, 30 years, 35 years, 40, 45 years, and 55 years was the oldest couple there that were married. At the end of that ceremony, after we renewed our vows, Bishop Peter, which I call last name, Bishop Peter, he's younger than me, that's why I did that, by the way. And I walked up to him and I said, Peter, Bishop Peter, I will be the co-sponsor to this bill. And he said, Senator, why? Because he told me to, as I raised my hand up to heaven. The last thing I want to talk about is our Constitution. We took it out to defend and protect the New Hampshire Constitution. I'll read it. Article 18, the last sentence, very important, the last sentence. Even when I make glasses on. Thank you very much. The true design of all punishment being to reform, not to exterminate mankind. Thank you, Madam Chair, and my honored colleagues.
Thank you very much, Senator. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair sees Senator Hosmer standing in the back. Had you signed up to speak?
I did.
Please come forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Andrew Hosmer, State Senator from District 7. I'm here to offer testimony supporting the repeal of New Hampshire's death penalty. I've not always felt this way. As a professional prosecutor, I had the opportunity to prosecute the most heinous crimes committed by malevolent predators. Predators who targeted the most vulnerable citizens in our communities: children, senior citizens, the developmentally disabled. I can still remember my very visceral response when visiting a crime scene or interviewing victims and their families. I often wondered what prevented the families of murder victims from jumping out of their seats in the courtroom and strangling the perpetrator. I wanted to do it as well on occasion. I believed the only true justice would be to execute the accused. Only in death could vengeance be attained. And most importantly to me at the time, the predator would never strike again, and there wouldn't be another victim or network of surviving loved ones. Having left the legal field almost 20 years ago, I've often thought about my relatively brief career, but one in which I had the opportunity to prosecute thousands of cases, ranging from motor vehicle offenses to murder. I had some very distinct and lasting impressions about my experience there. First, our criminal justice system works well. In fact, very well when we think of the volume of cases and the financial pressures facing our judicial system. Secondly, it's not a perfect system. Juries, judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys are human. They make mistakes. I make mistakes. Thirdly, a good indicator of how an accused will be handled by the criminal justice machinery is what's their education level? What's their socioeconomic status? What's their race? And if the accused is black or Hispanic, what's the victim's race? This is not meant to cast aspersions at good, conscientious professionals who work in our criminal justice system. My experience confirms the fact that the overwhelming majority of them do an excellent job. But the inescapable facts are clear to me. There is an inherent bias in the criminal justice system based on socioeconomic status, race, education levels, and offender-victim racial comparison. My experience and years of reflection have made it clear to me. If you're poor, poorly educated, black or Hispanic, the criminal justice system will treat you more harshly than if you're affluent, educated, or white. This leads me to the question, can capital punishment exist knowing there are shortcomings in the criminal justice system? My answer, after years of reflection, in many cases to look back on, is no. If our government is to take the life of another and justify it in the name of justice, it can't be justified with the overwhelming volume of data supporting the existence of shortcomings in the criminal justice system. To take the life of another is perhaps the ultimate retribution. It's barbaric, and it's absolutely final. Our government, if it has the right at all, must carry the overwhelming burden that the death penalty is administered fairly, without regard to socioeconomic status, race, or education. Unfortunately, our history clearly indicates the government cannot support this burden, and it's time for New Hampshire to abolish the death penalty. Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, thank you for your time today. I'm certainly open to any questions if you have them. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Madam.
The chair will call Representative Nodder.
Thank you. Good morning, Senators. For the record, I'm Representative Janine Nodder, Town of Merrimack, Hillsborough 21. Madam Chair, I believe I'm the only representative here to speak against the repeal. So as a member of that minority, I hope you'll forgive me for reading my testimony. I promise you it will go much more quickly than having me ramble off the top of my head. Senators, when I ran for my first term, one of the issues that I ran on was justice for victims of heinous crimes. It is still an issue that I believe in. That doesn't mean that I think that every murderer should get the death penalty. I don't. Only the worst of the worst. The death penalty law in New Hampshire covers only limited situations of murder. Last term, we had a slight expansion with the Kimberly L. Cates law that added home invasion murders to the list. It was a bill that I was proud to co-sponsor. The new law could not be applied to the thugs who murdered Kim Cates, but if there were to be another crime of a similar nature, the possibility could not be ruled out. How quickly we seem to have forgotten the Mount Vernon murder. Maybe we need to be reminded of it before you vote on this bill. Early in the morning on October 4th, 2009, Kim Cates and her daughter Jamie were brutally attacked in a home invasion. A group of heartless thugs broke into the Cates' home with knives and a machete. They cut the power and made their way down the long hall until they reached the master bedroom. Kim pleaded with her attackers, saying, "You don't have to do this." She weighed only 90 pounds. She punched and kicked with all her might, but she didn't have a chance against these creatures. You don't know what they did to her. I read the transcript, so I do. And that is how I know that a lifetime in jail is not justice for a crime such as this. Sleeping in mommy's bed is supposed to be the safest, most secure place in the world for a child. That is where Jamie was on the night when her mother was murdered. She was only 11 years old. The extent of Jamie's injuries was horrendous. I don't know how to relate to you the brutality of it all. I'm purposely not describing what happened to her because it was really that bad. Jamie was grievously injured. She was thrown across the room to the far wall. Maimed and bleeding, she could hear her mother struggling to breathe until the attackers silenced her forever. Then they kicked and stabbed the child one more time, turned back on the lights to view the scene of horror that they created, laughing with pleasure at what they did. I've been to the Cates' home. I saw for myself how far that child had to crawl to get to the phone. This is a very long house. Jamie, near death herself, must have had help from above to give her the strength to crawl across that master bedroom, past her mother, past the den, past the bathroom, past her own bedroom, past the living room, and then finally she made it to the kitchen. The cell phone was on the counter. I don't know how she managed to reach up and get it. She called 911, barely got out the words, "They killed my mommy," and she passed out. You might recall that a brave police officer injured his shoulder, breaking the door down to get Jamie. He saved her life. People all over the country were shocked by this murder. I know of an 11-year-old girl in my town of Merrimack who was affected by the murder. Elizabeth had met Jamie only once, but she remembers the two of them squirting water down on everyone that walked past them at the water park the previous summer. Elizabeth's mom, Nancy, came to the State House for the first time ever to testify at the Senate hearing for the Kim Cates bill. After the murder, Elizabeth slept in her mother's room for a whole year, worried that her family might suffer the same fate. The doctor had to prescribe medication for her. Jamie Cates had numerous surgeries since the attack, and as I was typing this up, I started to write every March, and the date popped up, March 7th rather. I wrote this on Kim's birthday. Well, actually, her birthday function was in Dr. McGowan. Anyway, I just kind of felt inspired. I heard Jamie say, it was on her birthday, Kim's birthday in 2010 that I was at the Cates home, and I heard Jamie say, "Today is Mommy's birthday." The sound of her voice saying those words are forever in my mind. She will never see her mother again. And I haven't even mentioned her dad, Dave Cates, and the heartbreak of losing his wife and best friend. You have no idea how hard it was for him to come here to Reps Hall to testify for Kim Cates' bill. But he did because he too believes that a lifetime in prison is not justice for the most brutal of crimes. The heartless monsters who murdered Kim Cates have the opportunity to visit with their family members for as long as they live. There's no ball and chain around their ankle. There's no strict diet of bread and water. Nope. Lifetime in prison with everything paid for by the taxpayers, and they can even earn a PhD. I ask you to remember the Cates family. And remember that this wasn't the first home invasion murder in New Hampshire. Dartmouth professors Hack and Suzanne Zantock, they were killed in a home invasion murder in 2001, and that was the murder that really changed my mind on the death penalty. I used to be against it, and then this happened, and then the Cates murder, and then also Officer Briggs. Some of my colleagues, representatives, they wear the button that says 83. 83 was Officer Michael Briggs' badge number. He was shot to death in the line of duty in 2006, leaving his wife a widow and his 2 young children fatherless. The issue is the repeal of the death penalty in New Hampshire, not the other states, just this one. Since the year 1734, 24 people have been executed in New Hampshire. No one has been executed since 1939. So you see, the death penalty is not overused, and it works in New Hampshire. There's currently 1 person on death row, and the repeal of this law will not affect the murderer who took Officer Briggs' life. But should there be another evil, heinous murder in this state, with no death penalty, what is there to take off the table to get murderers to cooperate if such action is needed? See, it's a bargaining chip. Death penalty only for the worst of the worst. This isn't about vengeance. It's about justice. Justice for victims of heinous crimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? I have a question for you, Representative. You stated that this bill will not affect the person who's currently on death row, but I would like to bring to your attention on the bill on page 6, line 16, where it talks about repeal. And in it, they repeal on line 19, RSA 630:5 relative to sentencing procedures and the death penalty, and RSA 630:6 relative to places other witnesses of execution. If this bill should pass, those 2 provisions will be repealed, and there will be no way for the state of New Hampshire to conduct an execution. So my concern is, what will happen to the person who is currently on death row if we have no method to conduct an execution?
I don't know. I guess it'll just stay in jail.
Okay, thank you very much. The chair will call Representative Sousa.
Good morning, honorable senators and members of the public, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kathleen Sousa. I'm a co-sponsor of this bill representing Hillsborough District 43, which is 3 wards in Manchester. I mean no respect to my colleague who just testified. I value her opinion greatly. However, my perspective is different. I believe we should not transfer to the state this awesome power. I do not believe the state deserves to have the power to decide life and death. If we were a completely just state and had the wisdom of Solomon, maybe it would be different. But our government, whom we empower, cannot see the value in the most innocent, preborn life, how can we give them the power to decide the value of any other human life? And in giving them this power, we have to ask ourselves, if we give them the power and there is an execution we vehemently, deeply disagree with, who is responsible for giving them the power? I don't believe the state deserves this power. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Representative Mark Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Friends of Committee, I'm Representative Mark Gordon from Goffstown. I was asked to come to this morning and share some thoughts with you about repealing the death penalty from a perspective of somebody who cherishes and promotes small government and individual liberty at every level. The problem with the death penalty is it's so final. If any mistakes have been made along the way during the prosecution, the wrong man could be sentenced to death. It's possible. In fact, not only is it possible, it's been shown to have happened over 100 times in the last century in the United States. People are flawed. People in government are certainly not perfect. They have personal prejudices and character flaws, just like everybody in this chamber. Not a day goes by that there's not something in the news about a corrupt judge or policeman or prosecutor. These people sometimes are not corrupt, they just perform malfeasance in office. Sometimes it's overzealous prosecution, sometimes mistakes, even honest mistakes, are made during investigations or lab work. At the very highest levels of government, the positions become very political in nature. We certainly know that quite well here in this building. Often, political ambitions overcome good police work or ethics. Is it common? No. But is it reality? Yes. It's because of the fallibility of humans that we should remove this ultimate power from the state on who decides to live or die. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Representative Zabrowski. Okay, the chair will call Representative Pam Tucker. Okay, we'll go to the next one, Representative Lynn Ober. Okay, Representative Frank Petowski. Representative Mary Jane Wallner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Mary Jane Wallner. I'm a state representative from Concord and Concord and Hopkinton. Members of the committee, I am here today to talk to you about the cost of the death penalty. Each of you will make your decision based on many factors, and I understand that no one will make their decision solely on the cost. But I do think it is important that we understand what the death penalty means to the finances of the state of New Hampshire. Presently, New Hampshire has only one death penalty case. Michael Addison was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of a Manchester police officer. Addison's prosecution, according to the Attorney General's office, has cost the state of New Hampshire $2.4 million as of December of 2013. The defense effort to date has cost taxpayers even more at $2.6 million. So to date, New Hampshire has spent $5 million on this one case. The future of this one case will be even more expensive. The Supreme Court case is less than half finished. The entire appeal would cost New Hampshire several million more dollars. In New Hampshire, the average non-capital defense costs between $50,000 and $100,000. Prosecution costs are similar, and the cost to house an inmate is $35,000 per year. In the Addison capital murder case, 1,200 jurors were summoned. For previous capital murder trials, an average of 300 jurors were summoned. Judge days in the Addison case were 53 days, enough for 5 capital murder cases. Jury selection in the case took 17 days. Most cases averaged 3.5 days. The Addison trial was 36 days long. The average non-capital murder trial was 6.5 days. The death penalty's complexity, length, and finality drive trial costs through the roof. Capital murder is far more costly than life without parole at $35,000 per year. The one death penalty case that New Hampshire has will probably cost us $8 to $10 million. The reality is that death penalty cases postpone justice for victims' families, devour millions of taxpayer dollars that could be used to serve cold cases, prevent crime, rehabilitate offenders, restore victims, or protect the public. I ask you to consider the cost of the death penalty as you make your decision. Ask yourself, is this the best use of taxpayers' dollars? Several million dollars to execute a person, or less than $1 million to have a life sentence without parole? I urge you to vote in favor of House Bill 1170. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative, I just want to make sure that you are concerned that we have spent too much money on the Addison case? Is that your...
I think that my concern is that it's very, very costly to New Hampshire taxpayers when life in prison is actually costs taxpayers less, but delivers a sentence that keeps a person in prison for the rest of their life. And I think we really have to weigh whether or not we feel this is the best use of our tax dollars when we have so many issues that are facing our state.
Thank you. Sorry, the chair will call Representative Bob Rowe. The chair will call Representative Melanie Levesque.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Senators. I rise in support of HB 1170 to repeal the death penalty. Thurgood Marshall said, "The American people say they support the death penalty, but if you educate people, they would not support the death penalty." I was first introduced to the death penalty by a group called the Innocence Project, in which I heard about many people who were incarcerated, exonerated, and some who were executed for crimes that they did not commit. One of the things I found quite shocking was that there seemed to be a disparate amount of minorities and people that were of little means. As far as minorities, I found that the African American population in America is 13%, yet 50% of those on death row were people of color. So that seems very disproportionate to me. I want to share with you 3 very brief examples of people that were executed and perhaps innocent. One was George Stinney, who at 14 was the youngest person to be executed. There was no physical evidence against him, and he was coerced to admitting And that was after 3 officers testified, and there were no witnesses, as I said. So he was the first to be, the youngest to be executed, and today his family is trying to exonerate him. Also, Jeremiah Reeves, who was one of the first cases that Martin Luther King worked on. Jeremiah Reeves was 16 years old. He was accused of murdering a white woman. And under duress, he did confess, but then he recanted. But yet, he was sentenced to death and killed. Another was, I have difficulty with his name, but Shuja Graham, who is a man that we had the opportunity to meet earlier this year. At the age of 18, he was incarcerated for a crime. And while he was in prison, there was a prison guard who was killed. He was charged with that crime. It took him about 7 years to finally become exonerated, but he was exonerated, and it was found out that it was the prison guards who killed the prison guard. For those of you who may know Sister Helen Cragine, she came to New Hampshire and talked with us about the death penalty. And I asked her, why is there so much disparities within the races? Why are there so many minorities that are caught up in the system? And she explained that in the South especially, people who were accused of crimes that were of color, they did not have money or means to get a lawyer. And therefore, they were tried and they were found guilty. That happened much more often. People who may have committed crimes against black people were not prosecuted. Yet, if a black person committed a crime against a white person, they were prosecuted. So, she also said to me something that really strikes me. She said it's not that they're bad people, it's just that they can't relate to these people. They don't know them or understand them, so it's easier for them to find them guilty. So, in closing, I just want to leave you with 3 people's names. And those names are Thomas Griffin, Miss Griffin, and Lena Baker. These are 3 people who were executed and exonerated 94 years and 60 years after their execution. So each morning when we come to session, we pledge allegiance to the flag, we put our hands over our hearts and we say, with liberty and justice for all. And you have to ask yourself, is that liberty, is that justice? When we kill people that may be innocent. So I do ask you senators to listen to the testimony and listen to the words of Thurgood Marshall, because I do believe that when people understand the death penalty, when they know it and they think about it, they really don't want it. And I hope that you'll feel the same. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative, you spoke quite eloquently about other cases around the country, and as you know, we currently have one individual on death row here in New Hampshire. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I feel that even though the examples that I talked about were long ago and far away in the South, I think it still happens here. Maybe not as often, but it happens, because when you have 3 people that have been incarcerated for the same death penalty eligible crime, yet only one of them has a death penalty sentence, there's some kind of disparity. And it really has to do with being able to afford a good lawyer as well.
I just would like to bring to your attention the testimony that was given previously by Representative Waller, who quoted to the committee that $2.6 million has been spent on the defense of our current death row person. Do you think that that is not adequate?
I think that if the penalty is life in prison without parole, it would not have an automatic costly repeal as we have today. And it costs less to house somebody at $35,000 a year than to meet that high bar of the appeals that the death penalty goes through. And in one additional thing, the death penalty, once it's executed, is permanent. And as they say, it's not right to walk over the innocent to get to the guilty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will call Representative Valencourt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Steve Valencourt. I represent Manchester Ward 8. This, since I've been here since 1997, is the third time the Senate is hearing a death penalty repeal bill. I believe it was in 2000 that the Senate and the House both voted for repeal, and it was vetoed by then Governor Shaheen. I remember speaking from that podium right behind Senator Soucy on the override of that bill. Unfortunately, we did not manage to override. Another year, the House passed repeal, the Senate did not. This year, ironically, the year the governor says she will sign the bill, the House passed it by a veto-proof margin. You know, speaking for the death penalty is never a pleasant thing. Because I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to bear false witness. I'm not going to come up here and tell you that it's a popular position. A recent poll, and I've given you this, by the University of New Hampshire Center, the Granite State poll from WMUR, shows that still today, by a 2-to-1 margin, New Hampshire voters prefer the death penalty. Even when given the opportunity of life in prison without parole, in the country, people opt for without parole. But in New Hampshire, 48 to 40, they still support the death penalty. In my own Manchester area, it is not 2-to-1 against, in favor of the death penalty, it is 3-to-1. So I come to you today to say you're going to have to, if you pass this bill, do something very unpopular. But at times, we have to do what is unpopular. Two things I heard on the radio as I was on my way up today. Senator Clark spoke of Texas. Another person, I believe, spoke of Texas. We passed this bill in a day. Texas had a person exonerated. But today, there was another sentence in Texas that is supposed to be carried out tonight, a death penalty for a person who's a serial killer, and there's a hearing in Texas someplace right now to see if the way they're giving lethal injection is actually proper. So I think you should know about that as you deliberate this today. On a somewhat lighter note, on the way up today I also heard it was the birthday of German former Chancellor Helmut Kohl. And I note this because I want to talk a bit about what happened to me when Kohl was Chancellor of Germany, and I used to visit Berlin on a regular basis. Now, as you probably know, probably the worst pieces of inhumanity that had ever occurred in the history of mankind happened in Germany, in the war, and in various other times. Yet when I used to be in Berlin, visiting Kneipe, the corner bars, or other places, the subject of the death penalty usually came up because I did talk politics even when I was enjoying the pleasures of the old world. Whenever I would bring up the subject of the death penalty with my German friends, they spoke English, I would get this look as if they're saying, "What are you talking about? Do we support the death penalty?" It was almost felt like they were talking to an alien. The subject was so alien to them. Of course they do not support the death penalty. How could a civilized society kill another human being to say that killing a human being is wrong? That is the universal feeling in Germany, which did some of the most terrible things that mankind will ever know. So I'm always taken back to Germany and how these Germans today didn't even understand what I was talking about when I mentioned the death penalty. The previous speaker gave you the example of 3 people exonerated. When this bill passed the House, it was before the Criminal Justice Committee, I actually had the computer room hook up a recorder, and I played for them a 10-minute ABC News program for the summer. I was actually chilled when I heard it. It was the story of Carlos de Luna, who again in Texas was executed, most certainly, wrongly convicted. A previous speaker talked about the absolute evil that exists in the world, the absolute evil involved in the Cates murder. I suggest to you that there was absolute evil in the form of Timothy McVeigh also. And I happened to be driving back from a weekend trip the night that Timothy McVeigh was going to be killed the next morning, and I took no pleasure in this absolutely evil man being killed by the state. It's a question of all or nothing. Either you believe in the death penalty or you don't. Although it is popular to believe in the death penalty, I cannot do it, and I hope you can't either. A previous speaker, I really took exception to, talked about if you get rid of the death penalty, you'll take the option off the bargaining table. One time when we passed this bill, John Kakavas was a representative. As you know now, he's gone on to, what is he, a state U.S. attorney or something? He was a rep, and although he supported keeping the death penalty, he told us you must never, as a prosecutor, use the death penalty as a bargaining chip. That is prosecutorial misconduct. So I hope you'll banish that from your thoughts. You asked about the Michael Addison case. I guess I'm the only person, or one of the few in the House, that said, if you're going to get rid of the death penalty, it's not right to execute Michael Addison. What if this bill passes and is signed by the governor? Michael Addison, and I appreciate your comments, Madam Chairman, will still die, according to many. But what if that very day the governor signs this, somebody kills 3 police officers in Manchester? That person will live while Michael Addison dies? I don't think that's right. So I ask you to support this bill, and I hope you're right, Madam Chair, that this would mean that Michael Addison is not killed, because either you believe in death for some or death for none. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Lasky has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Representative.
Good morning.
You brought up the state of Texas and executions. Do you know how many people have been executed in the state, say, in the last decade?
I know the state of Texas is one of the leaders in the nation. I don't have the exact number. I also know that most of the southern states are among the leaders in the nation. I think that says something. I don't want to disparage the South, but I believe most of the states around us have gotten rid of it. So I don't know the answer, but if you want, I can give you the information on Carlos de Luna. I didn't want to play the tape for you to take up your time, but to me that was a chilling note. I don't know the number.
Thank you. Do you happen to know where the state of Texas falls in the category of safest states in the nation?
I assume you're asking that to get us to the fact that the death penalty being removed would not make a state safer. If that's the crux of your question, I think I would agree with that, but research could provide you with that information.
Thank you.
The chair will call Representative Baltasaro. At this point, there are a number of representatives who have signed up, so I'm going to ask the representatives for a 3-minute time limit on their testimony. We really need to start hearing from the members of the public who have come up here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senators. For the record, Representative Al Baltasaro, Rockingham County, District 5, which is Londonderry. I come here today to oppose this bill, and I'll explain why. Earlier I heard there about color. I heard that there's issues here. I come from a large Italian family out of Massachusetts with Portuguese, Spanish, Black in my family. Some Irish too. The bottom line here, this isn't about color, okay? Those are the people that, got caught up in the system. 9 out of 10 of them got in trouble. So this has nothing to do with that. This is about protecting the innocent here in New Hampshire. This is a deterrent, this here bill. You must ask yourself here in New Hampshire, what are we doing right that other states around us have more murders than I think this side of Vermont? What are we doing right in New Hampshire? I know when I go home to my family, they talk about New Hampshire being tough on crime. Be careful when you drive to New Hampshire. Don't do anything stupid in New Hampshire. They don't mess around. By repealing this here, you asked many questions about the Michael Addison. Let's who we kidding ourselves there. When you repeal this here, the Michael Addison case will have to go away because there will be no death penalty on the books. It sounds good to say no. Representative Valencourt's right. He's the only one who stood up with an amendment and to put people on record and I'm going to call them hypocrites, that want a death penalty, that want to oppose it, but yet they wouldn't support his amendment. It's a shame. What do you tell the Casey family, or the Cates family, okay, or Officer Briggs family, that we're going to repeal the death penalty because we're concerned with maybe $2.5 million or maybe $6 million being spent on appeals? How much money do you put on the death of a police officer or a home invasion? What do you tell that family? In closing, I need to make sure that we take a look at the crime here in New Hampshire. We have a great record here in New Hampshire of being one of the safest states in the country. There's reason for that. And I'm sure nobody ever studied why, because we put an amendment in for that also, and that our friends did not want that to go on why New Hampshire is successful. I'm asking you today to let's do the right thing. Keep the death penalty on the books. It's a deterrent, because if you repeal this here, and a prison guard, God forbid, gets killed, what are they going to do now? Sit around the campfire at the prison and sing Kumbaya? Because you opened up the door for anyone there. Well, if I kill a prison guy, then I can just stay and go to another jail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions for the representative? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Representative Shirtliff.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Steve Shirtliff. I represent Merrimack District 11, which is Concord Ward 1, the village of Pinnacle. And I'm here this morning, Madam Chair, to ask the committee to support House Bill 1170. Madam Chair, I spent over 30 years working in law enforcement, starting in 1969 as a Concord police officer and retiring in the year 2000 from the U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Marshal Service. In all my years in law enforcement, I continually supported the death penalty. In 2004, Madam Chair, I was elected to the New Hampshire House. But for my last 4 terms, whenever a repeal bill would come up, I'd vote against it. In 2009, as the then chair of the House Criminal Justice Committee, I was appointed to the commission to study the death penalty. The commission met for months, and on our final vote, we were given the option of making 3 recommendations to the governor and to the legislature to either abolish the death penalty, enhance the death penalty, or maintain our current law. The committee was split 12-12, with half the commission voting to abolish the death penalty and the other half maintaining our current death penalty law. As a 13th and deciding vote, I cast a vote to keep our current death penalty law. This year, when 1170 came up in the House, I did a lot of soul searching. I don't think there's any bill I've had in the last 10 years that I've agonized over more than this issue of the death penalty. And Madam Chair, I thought about the death I recently read about in Ohio, where it took over 20 years for a man to die from a lethal injection. And in my mind, that truly was cruel and unusual punishment. I thought about the facts and figures that Representative Walner told us about this morning and the cost of incarceration. But most importantly, I thought about the words of my own parish priest, who said to me, he said, "Steve, you know, innocent people are executed, and we only need to read the New Testament to know that." Madam Chair, I ask you and the committee to please vote ought to pass on 1170. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions for the representative? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Representative Patricia Higgins.
Thank you very much for hearing my testimony. I had not planned to speak, but in response to an earlier speaker, my husband and I were both friends, and my husband's a colleague of the 2 people who were murdered in Hanover, Hampshire, 2 Dartmouth professors. And I know that they would be very disappointed to have heard that their crime that took their lives, changed someone's mind about the death penalty to actually wanting to have their killers killed. And I will speak with Representative Notter personally, but I did want the committee to hear that. Phil McLaughlin testified at a committee hearing a month ago. On the death penalty. He said he was moved by the children of those two professors, Half and Susanne Sonnenfeld, who were murdered in 2001. He said they spoke of their compassion at the sentencing hearing of the Xantop's teenage killers and never uttered a word in retribution. I would be very sad to think that Representative Notter was in support of killing those individuals, given the position. I've known the Xantops for many years. They were very much opposed to it. Their children were. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions? Thank you. The chair will call Representative, and I apologize if I get your name wrong, Lapa Benjamin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the committee members. I'm a representative from the Hillsborough District 5, Nashua. As the newest member of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee on the House Committee, I stand here in support of repeal of death penalty. Few reasons. One, having heard, like you are hearing today, having sat in that place and listening to all the victims, or family members of the victims who gave their lives because of the murder, and listening to them, we did not hear one family member stand up and say that gave them emotional closure, knowing that the killer of their loved one was sentenced to death, and taking their life, the killer's life, would give them emotional satisfaction. And you've heard several testimony about how costly it is. And also, I would like to bring your attention to the folks that go through the trial or the execution process. And people who have to carry out this execution, what is their emotional status after the execution? What is their post-traumatic in terms of taking some human life? So, coming from a culture where you don't honor eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, let's join the culture or the civilized world of where we are not asking for an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. So let's look at this as an opportunity to rise above, do what we need to do with compassion, and at the same time provide that opportunity for the family members to heal and move on, not relive because of the repeal and over again going through the emotional process of losing a loved one in a heinous crime. So I stand here, thank you for giving me the time, and I stand here in supporting the bill, and it was an honor for me to be sitting at the Criminal Justice Committee, listening to all the public testimony, and be able to vote for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Representative Zabrowski. We have a 3-minute rule.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you. I'll be under 3 minutes. I'd like to highlight the comments. I'm co-sponsor of the bill, I think as you all know. I'd like to highlight the 3 of the comments I made at the House floor debate a couple of weeks ago. Number 1, prison. I believe life without parole in an 8-foot by 10-foot cage is a far worse penalty for a capital crime. Number 2, deterrence. Desperate people do do not kill all miscreant sailors, we no longer have public floggings. Each abolition represents an advance of civilization. Abolition of the death penalty represents a further advance. End quote. Let me repeat that, please, that last sentence. Each abolition represents an advance of civilization. Abolition of the death penalty represents a further advance. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions?